Kaivepo Zuva began. Zefunde, the boy Mnyaradzi responded, acknowledging his interest in the story. Let me tell you the story of the unconventional queen, Zuva said. A long time ago, in a land called Gara, there lived a king, his queen, and their 4 sons. The king was loathed by everyone because of his absolute rule over the kingdom. His tributes were so high that the people had to reduce the number of meals they had per day so that they could pay in time, or else they would be tried for treason. He had a spy network so vast that even when a person had a bad dream of the king or so much as whispered the king's name, the king would hear of it. The king took all the maidens of the village for his pleasure, thus making girls unmarriageable because their chastity had been stolen. And his favorite punishment was decapitation. His court sessions were so short, he only had to proclaim one word, guilty, and the executioner would come forward and with his machete finish off the work. Nobody in the kingdom loved the king. Even though no one could raise their dissent loudly, in their hearts, where no spy could penetrate, they loathed the man. So when the king passed, there was a great celebration across the kingdom. His wife, Queen Fadzai, did not tell anyone the state in which she had found him, squatting while doing his ablutions, with a fresh mound underneath him and a swarm of flies circling the mound. He had been gone for hours for his morning ablutions before she got worried. She knew that sometimes he used that time to be with the maidens he hunted across the village. But when the sun rose higher and higher and started its tilt westward, she got worried. So she found him in that undignified position. When she had tried to hide his indignity and pull him away from the mound, he had been too heavy for her. As he had consumed more and more tribute and more food, he had simply grown bigger and bigger, and now his hefty frame refused to budge. So in the end, she had opted to dispose of the mound with a shovel, then cleaned her husband up before letting out a royal scream. 2 royal aides had rushed to help, but they too failed to lift the heavy frame, so they called for reinforcement. 2 more came and failed, and then others, until 8 aides carried the man to his hut. The herb doctor was called, but it was too late as the king's body was already cold. Before the announcement could, however, be made to the rest of the world, the advisors were called. The eldest amongst them, Jerry, spoke. The oldest son is just 11, still a boy. He told the others who already knew this. He is too young to be king. The other elders nodded, but no one said a thing. The issue here is that the king had been his father's only child, so there is no brother and no uncle to become king regent. The other elders nodded, looking furtively around as if expecting to see the king arrive. So who then becomes regent? Jerry asked. A young advisor, barely more than 20, rose, and he too looked furtively around. Then he asked, "Is the king really gone?" Jerry nodded and said, "Yes, I saw him with my own 2 eyes, lying on the floor in his bedroom, deceased." Jerry understood why the young advisor had asked this question. The king had not been hesitant to maim and behead even those that served before him, so one had to be really sure he was gone. Then the young man continued, "I am sorry. May he rest." The others murmured their condolences too. Seeing that there is no one within the family who can stand in as regent until the boy grows, the young man continued, "Then I nominate you, Advisor Jerry, as the new regent. Your family has served in advisorial roles for the longest times, and you know more about Kara than any of us here. Besides, you are also soft and wise, and that is what Kara needs right now." Despite the nods of assent from the other advisors, however, Jerry was shaking his head. My leaders, he said, I do appreciate that you do see me as worthy of carrying this kingdom on my shoulders. However, despite this faith that you have in me, I would like to humbly excuse myself from the regency, as my role in Gara is to give advice to leaders and not to lead. In addition, the kingdom belongs to the Gara family, and as such, it has to remain in the hands of the descendants. Suppose, my elders, that I die while I am king regent. Who is to say that no one in my family will also want to be regent? And who is to foresee what trouble that might bring for the kingdom when the real king has to ascend to power? So thank you for the nomination, but I shall not accept it. So who then shall become king regent? One advisor asked. It will have to be someone who brings healing to this kingdom, another advisor suggested. I know many of you may not agree with me publicly, but we know in our hearts that the last king wreaked havoc in our land, and the people need a calm leader to unite them and bring them peace. Who will that be then? Another advisor asked. Jerry spoke. The prince's mother, he said, and as his words landed in the ears around him and comprehension dawned around the listeners, there was a collective gasp in the crowd as though some invisible hands had pinched the advisors on cue. A woman? One advisor said as his gasp died down. A queen? Another asked. What an abomination! Another exclaimed. Where has a woman ever ruled? Another laughed. Oh, the punishment we shall receive from our ancestors, still another said. We shall have no rain, another said. We shall suffer for choosing a woman leader when we have strong and sturdy men to run this village. That little boy, the youngest prince, the one who was born a summer ago, still another laughed, will make a better leader than all the women of this village combined. And all the advisors laughed with him. What will other kingdoms think of us? Another asked. The funniest thing is that women in this village will start to have ideas, and they will want to rule and lord over us in our own homes. Another also objected. And what will happen if there is a war? Will she be able to lead us? What military strength will she possess that will help us conquer? And many heads nodded. Jerry waited for them all to quieten. Then he spoke. My elders, he said, there is a reason why you have been chosen to be advisors, and that is because all the successive kings who have chosen you believed you were of great minds. We are not here to choose a king or a queen, but a regent. This will merely mean that Queen Fadzai will step into the shoes of Prince for just 4 or 5 summers, and then the new king will take over his reign and his reigns. We have an army, and it has a chief war leader who is here. If we go to war, then that war leader simply will direct the military. But the advisors were not appeased by Jerry's responses and continued to question why a woman had to lead. And Jerry had to speak up again. Yes, we as Garai have never had a female leader, he said. And yes, that is true for all the kingdoms around us. But look at us, he implored. We have had a male leader, but which one amongst you has not lost a family member to the previous king? Huh? No one responded. We have had a king who did not think twice about taking our maidens for his satisfaction, or send one on an early ancestral errand for the silliest of things. Each family in Gara has been afflicted, and each family needs closure. He was quiet for a while, waiting for the impact of his words to set in, and there was not a murmur from the advisors as they all remembered the heinous excesses of the newly departed king. Now, Jerry continued, listen to me carefully. I am not saying that the Queen Regent will be a better leader than any man here. No, she is sure to have her own flaws. But what I am saying is she will bring healing to our land. Women are more compassionate than us because they are mothers and because they know what it is to carry the world in their wombs. A woman would think twice about calling the executioner on a teenage boy or on an old grandmother. She will not take maidens out of our homesteads to please her and satisfy her. No. With the right direction, with the right advice, we as Gara might get the reprieve that everyone deserves after all these years of pain and fear. Again, the advisor said nothing as Jerry's words seeped in. Men of Gara, Jerry concluded, let us decide now. As is custom, whenever a decision is difficult to reach, we throw in bones and sticks into the clay pot. The sticks shall mean yes to the queen regent, and the stones shall mean no to the queen regent. As we cast our votes, I want all of us to remember that we do not have time, as the announcement of the king's death has to be made and the burial processions have to begin. The clay pot was taken to a corner of the advisorial room by an aide, and one after the other, the 23 men in the council stood to cast their votes. The aide then brought the clay pot closer and, emptying it before the council, counted 12 sticks and 11 stones. Queen Fadzai was to become regent. After the selection, the mourning queen was alerted of a brand new role in the kingdom. Then the drummer, the horn blower, and the trumpet player were summoned into the yard. The king has passed, Jerry told them. Go into the villages and play the king's dirge. Let people know and mourn their king. The drummer started his beat, his palms hitting the hide decisively and loudly, yet slowly and so sadly that even the dogs stopped their wanderings and tilted their heads sadly to the side. Then the trumpeter arose, picking each key thoughtfully and accompanying the drummer in the slow beats before the horn blower sounded his horn 4 times in successive sessions, then another 4 times, then another. The people of Gara heard the king's dirge as they toiled in their fields, ferried water from streams into their homes, and bustled about in their daily chores as they attempted to meet the tribute quarters. They all stopped their chores, but no one looked at the next person. For all they knew, this could be a trick, a prank from the king, with all that fell for it falling before the executioner in due time. They stood and watched the band members play their music, and after them the procession of advisors walking past them, and lastly the royal family, the queen and her 4 sons, escorted by their aides as they walked around the perimeter of the village. One by one, the villagers dropped their farming implements, the pails on their heads, the carving and weaving tools they held, and the women snuffed the fires they were preparing meals over, and they began to follow behind the procession. By the time the procession had gone around the perimeter of the village, and everyone was assembled before the royal arena, the royal crier sounded his horn and officially announced the king's death. As the death knell sounded, silence befell the crowd, and everyone within them held a sigh of relief. No one wanted to believe the good news that they would be now free of a man who had terrorized and tormented them immensely. Then from somewhere in the center of the crowd, someone blew a low whistle. Then another whistle sounded. Then another matched with it, and a low and slow ululation rose, and before long the low hum of whistles and ululations became loud cheers, and the crowd were shaking hands amongst each other in congratulations, and hugging each other because of the fortune that had fallen on them. Someone screamed amongst the crowd, "Free at last!" and chants arose, "Free, free, free!" The people of Gara were happy. It took a while for the chief advisor, Jerry, to silence the chanting crowd. "People of Gara," he said when they finally gave him a chance to speak, "we as the elders are not averse to the pain that you have suffered. However, we as a people have always been bound together by the bonds of dignity and the respect for each other's lives. As such, I would like to implore you, with all the sincerity that I possess, to respect the dead and allow the royal family to mourn in peace. Please, people of Gara. But despite the implores from Jerry and other advisors to be respectful of the departed, any visitor into the kingdom would have sworn that the event was a feast rather than a funeral. The people brewed large drums of beer, and gourds were passed from one mouth to the next as people drank and danced. During the burial, as several dignitaries rose to give speeches about the departed king, whenever any speaker would mention how great a leader the departed was, or how he had effected change in Gara, they would be met by catcalls and jeers, and their voice would be drowned. The people of Gara realized that it was the end of a painful era, and they welcomed it. But the celebrations ended the day after the burial, as the coronation of the new king was set to take place. Throughout the funeral, there had been speculation of who would become regent, as the prince was too young and there was not a male old enough in Gara village and who was part of the royal family to take over this role. The whispers had concluded that it would be Jerry, as he was knowledgeable of royal matters and could command the kingdom. However, even this rumor was met with dread and skepticism. He was the late king's advisor, wasn't he? The people whispered amongst themselves. What if he continues to enact the laws left by the late king? We would have celebrated this funeral for nothing. On the day of the coronation, people wore their best clothes and invaded the kingdom arena from as early as dawn. They all wanted to see who would become their new leader. Meanwhile, the royal compound was abuzz. Queen Fadzai had been told she would become regent as her own son was being prepared for kingship in the next years, but she had put this behind her as she prepared for her husband's burial. But now that the burial was over, she was struggling to fathom herself as the person in charge of the kingdom. Make me a dress of feathers only, she instructed the dressmaker as their measurements were being taken. Find the plumage of delicate birds like doves, pigeons, and bring only black, white, and grey feathers. The dressmaker bowed her head and said, Queen Mother, finding the right plumage may take me time, and yet the coronation is to happen soon. Isn't there anything else to mix and match with the feathers? But the queen did not hear the dressmaker, simply adding, I want to see the dress before coronation day. I do not want to see surprises and find myself wearing a dress that will make people doubt my new role in the kingdom. The skin tanner was also called, and using leopard and lion prints, fashioned new skins for the soon-to-be king and the younger princes. Make sure the king-in-waiting skin strap are long and cover his frame. Even before he becomes king, people should know that it is him that they will bow down to in the future, the queen told the skin tanners. To the goldsmith and the crown maker, Queen Fadzai said, bring the biggest gem you can find. Paint it red so that it glows. Then make sure the plating of the crown is all gold so that the gem will sit in the center and scorch the eyes of the people who look at it. Create a similar yet smaller crown for the king in waiting and make sure they match in every detail except in size. And the goldsmith sped off. The jeweler also came and was instructed to create bangles that would cover the entire forearm. The caterers were instructed to roast hogs around the courtyard, which would be on spits, and with people coming from the coronation would just have to cut bits and pieces and feed themselves until they were full. On the day of the coronation, as the procession to the arena began, and as Queen Fadzai sat in the donkey-drawn cart, she could not help but remember the same procession years ago when she had gone to dance for the prince at the Maidens' Festival, and she, amongst the thousands of girls who had paraded for the sport of princes, had been the one to be chosen to become prince. And now, here she was, on her way to become queen. Who would have thought? When the royal procession entered the arena, a hush fell over the crowd. Eyes watched as the advisors, in turn, came to take their seats on the podium, but the crowd got more and more interested and restless when the royal family entered and then took their seats beside the advisors. Advisor Jerry stood before the crowd and began a long rambling speech that agitated the people further. Then he handed over the podium to the chief customary and traditional advisor. The old man stood and in a monotone voice began, "People of Gara, we meet again today to crown the leader who will lead us in the next 4 summers as we wait for the rightful king to take his place. It is now with great pleasure that I introduce to you our regent, Queen Fadzai." Without any urging or coercive bidding, Queen Fadzai stood regally, her black, grey, and white dress rising with her, and a few whimsical feathers flying off and scattering into the wind. But it was the stunned silence in the crowd that was even more palpable. It was as though collectively the people of Garai had taken a deep breath and then forgot to breathe out. In their minds, the same thought whirled. What have we done as a kingdom to deserve first a cruel king, then now a woman leader? But not one person could voice those thoughts out loud. The trauma of a leader who had quelled dissent with a machete was still too real that they could not question, but only give a lukewarm applause. They listened sadly as the chief customary and traditional advisors spoke of the strength of Gara, and they almost wept when out of a large bag he took out the symbols of the kingdom. The elephant tusk, the advisor told the crowd holding up a small tusk, symbolizes the strength and power of Gara and therefore speaks of the longevity of our kingdom. The whistle, he held up the small artifact, is used in all our rituals to call upon our spirits and ancestors so they can guide us all the time. And lastly, the golden bangle. Erase the artifact so it caught a hint of light, speaks to the prosperity of our nation. Now, people of Gara, it would do you good to remember that the one who possesses all 3 correct artifacts and not replicas will be the king of Gara. Those 3 authentic artifacts are carefully hidden and sealed to protect the kingdom. And even a king or a queen regent in this instance will need to be ordained by the ancestors to find them without knowing their location. Understood? The crowd nodded their assent. Understood? He asked the queen, regent to be, and she nodded too. If all is understood, then it is time for the coronation. He beckoned the queen closer, and as she moved, a host of feathers flew off her dress and began to dance in the air. Queen Fadzai, he said, for you to become the leader of the Gara kingdom, there are several pledges that you need to promise to uphold. I will recite the pledges for you, and you have to agree to them. Understood? The queen nodded and said, I do, my elder. Then do you pledge to uphold justice and fairness for all the citizens, regardless of their status? I do, my elder, she responded. Do you pledge to work tirelessly for the economy of the kingdom, ensuring all sectors thrive and our land flourishes? I do, my elder, she responded. Do you pledge to maintain peace within our borders and with our neighbors and to avoid conflict at all times? I do, my elder, she responded. Do you pledge to step down once your time is over so that the rightful king will take his place? I do, my elder, she responded. The elder smiled. Then by the powers entrusted to me by the kingdom, I now declare you Queen Regent Fadzai. Again, the clapping and ululation from the crowd was lukewarm. The crowd watched as the advisor on religious matters stood and walked towards the Queen Regent. In his hand, he held 3 necklaces and pendants of a tusk, a bangle, and a whistle, and he dipped this in the marula and baobab oils around him. Then the necklaces were placed on the queen's neck ceremoniously. But all this took place in a riotous wave of black, grey, and white feathers. Then the queen was led to the throne, and the musicians struck some chords, and the coronation was done. Before everyone goes to their homes, Jerry was saying to the crowd, go to the royal courtyard and enjoy the feast that has been prepared for you. The new queen and her family were the last to leave, and as the queen regent stood and was led to the donkey-led cart, more feathers flew off her dress, and now big patches of material could be seen. The younger princes were bellowing and laughing and chasing feathers with their hands as the cart led them away, while the queen stewed in frustration and anger at the dressmaker. When they finally arrived at the royal courtyard, the people already had wok at millet sadza on their plates and grease on their mouths, and a merriment that had not been experienced in the courtyard for a long time rang across the yard. But when the Queen Regent disembarked from the carriage, a hush fell over the crowd as everyone tried to understand the make of her dress, as patches of cloth now exceeded the few feathers that stuck out. The whole village stared, not sure what to make of this dress, but even more scared to laugh as they remembered their late king's cruelty. But a group of girls, not older than 5 years, saw the dress, and one of them, pointing at it with a rude finger, laughed, and the rest of them burst out laughing, and soon enough the rest of the crowd was trying so hard to rein in their hilarity. The queen quickly dashed out of the carriage as more feathers flew and kids ran around trying to catch them. The people of Gara soon, however, came to realize that their new queen was nothing like their old king. As soon as their reign began, there was pressure amongst the advisors for the queen to reduce the tax burden, and she did so, telling the advisors, "As long as the tribute reduction will not weaken my son's inheritance," which the advisors assured her it would not. The queen also inadvertently disbanded the spy network, because when a group of spies came to report to her that some women were still laughing at the fiasco of her dress, she had looked at them dead in the eye and asked, "So what?" The executioner also retired, as there were no execution sentences that were issued under her reign. But relief was felt most amongst the parents of girls, as they realized they would no longer have to sacrifice their daughters for the king's pleasure. But the only rule that she allowed to remain was the ban on jewelry amongst the kingdom's women. "There is only one woman in royalty," she reasoned with the advisors. "If all the women are allowed to wear earrings and necklaces and bangles, how will people know the difference between them and I?" The advisors had allowed that one to pass. "It's better than having people pay breaking tributes," they said amongst themselves. "The women folk will have to understand." But despite the lax hand with which the queen ruled Gara, the people of Gara continued to look at her with suspicion. They too questioned why a woman had to lead when there were many capable men around. They failed to understand why the advisors had chosen her above all of Gara's population. Queen Fadzai's reign was, however, filled with frivolity. As was mandated of Gara's leader, she would sit with the royal advisors once every week, and she would listen to them talk of politics, of how which family would make it into the advisorial council next, talk of the economy, of what debts had been paid and what and who was still owed, talk diplomacy with other kingdoms, and plan for the future king's reign. And all she did as they spoke was nod and smile when they directly addressed her. But in the moments no one was addressing her, she would be staring vacantly into the air, thinking of her next dress and the next gathering, or which of her friends she would invite for the next event as her second in charge. Whenever the advisors would ask her for input or suggestions on how better to run the kingdom, she would pack up and suggest something outrageous. "We always have a rain-making ceremony at the beginning of the rainy season," she would say. "Why can't we have a sun appreciation ceremony?" Or she would say something out of the ordinary, such as, "All the girls in the village have to join their boy age mates in the pastures so that they too learn the things that the boys learn, like hunting, herding, or warfare." And this would be much to the chagrin of the advisors. However, even though the advisors did not take her seriously, they knew that she had absolute power, and they knew that if they failed to indulge her less evil whims, they would likely breed a monster that would become worse than the last king. So the queen had a grand celebrations. The Sun Appreciation Festival came, and everyone in the kingdom was made to create yellow outfits from materials that they could find and hold huge yellow fans with which they waved to the sun from noon till day end while dancing and singing. While the event was a hit amongst the children who ran around the sun celebrating, the adults cried amongst themselves about a day that they had lost, which they could have better used thatching their roofs or harvesting in their fields. The queen also celebrated the day of the girl child, again to the amusement of the kingdom. All girls on this particular day, she had told the advisors and the messengers, shall not do any back-breaking work. They shall not fetch water or clean their homes or work their parents' fields. Instead, their brothers will do all the chores for them. The girls will wear their best dresses and come and have a feast in the royal courtyard, and they will only be allowed to return home the next morning. The most ridiculous law that she enacted was the Great Fish Ban. As she had been a Hove daughter with fish as their totem, culture forbade her from eating fish. I don't see why anyone else is to eat fish, she had told the stand advisors after they had asked for a contribution in the second year of her reign. If I can't eat it and I can survive, why would anyone die from eating fish? When the fishermen and the fishmongers protested, she had told them, become farmers, Gara has plenty of land. But because she was not a strict leader, people defied the ban and sold and ate fish in secrecy. The queen's unconventionality, however, became a source of discontent amongst the kingdom. We need a king, people would say amongst themselves and to their advisors when they met them. This woman should be gossiping with her age mates. She has no business running a kingdom. All in good time, the advisors would assure them. The king in waiting is currently going through rigorous training so that he does not become as cruel as his father or as frivolous as his mother. You just have to wait and see. And you don't even have long. He's almost ready. So they waited patiently. Now, amongst the queen's many frivolities was a penchant for knowing her future. The path from her royal heart to the seer's heart was well beaten and worn out. Every other week, she would be knocking at the seer's heart to ask what would happen to the kingdom in the future, or to her stashes of jewelry, or the kind of king her son would become. The seer would scatter bones into the air, and with an ostrich's feather would point out bones, telling the queen that her son would grow up to be a strong leader, and that the other sons would marry well, and that she would have lots of granddaughters to compensate for the lack of her own daughters. The seer would also support her grand celebrations and encourage her with her ideas, and for his dues he would receive the confiscated jewelry, and food would be sent to his home from the royal compound regularly. When rumors of a seer in the nearby Zambezia kingdom arose, Queen Fadzai's curiosity was stirred. The rumor told of a seer who could tell one of their past up to their great-grandparent and their future up to their great-grandchild. He is honest too, the rumor said, does not care who you are and what you do for a living, he will just tell you as it is. Invite him, Queen Fadzai commanded her aides. Find him and bring him here. It took the seer 3 months to arrive in the royal compound, and when Queen Fadzai placed a plateful of trinkets before him, inducing him to speak, the seer pushed it away. The truth is my sustenance. You do not have to pay me, my queen. The Queen Fadzai shrugged, then asked, what do you see, seer? The young man coughed, then said, I see a queen, rising from the dust, brushing away leaves, donning her bangle of gold, a horn in her hand, a whistle hanging by her throat. I see a queen, rising. The queen laughed. It is me, she said. I am already queen. See? She showed him the 3 necklaces hanging by her throat. I already have these things, you say. You are speaking of the past. I want to know the future. The seer looked at the queen. I see the future, the nearest future. The queen has a bangle already. Your necklaces, nothing. She is coming. The queen is coming. Queen Fadzai laughed out loud. You know nothing, Sia. You see nothing. You see nothing. Now, get out of my face. The seer packed his things up, but before he stood, he looked Queen Fadzai squarely in the eye and said, a new queen is coming, and it is not you. The end. Zuva finished. The boy was quiet for a while, pondering. Then he said, at least the people of Gara have rested from cruelty. Don't you think? Zuva nodded. The boy was quiet again, then he asked, is this new Queen Rashai? Zuva laughed. You will have to find out soon enough. Just wait and see. The end. Thank you guys for listening all the way to the end. The Zuva series will continue next week, so please stay tuned to see what next Saturday brings. I also look forward to hearing from you and whether you're liking the stories and also what you think will happen to Rashai and your quest for kingdom and what will happen to Queen Fadzai as well. So please let me know in the comment section below. Also, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share with others. Love you long time. Bye.